There are moments when life pauses, and we quietly ask ourselves, why do the same things keep happening? Why do we walk in circles, returning to the same pain, the same silence, the same goodbye? Why do some relationships fall apart before they ever truly begin? Why does the world feel so blind to us, when all we've ever wanted is to be seen? And often, we believe the cause lies outside, in others, in fate, in a world that seems unfair. But what if what we encounter on the outside had already begun within us? Not as guilt, but as imagination. The ancient mystics said, "You do not see the world as it is, but as you are." What you feel, what you accept, what you secretly believe is possible, all of that forms an inner image. And this image acts, not always immediately, not always predictably, but it weaves itself into the events of your life. The world responds to your inner state, like water to the motion of your hand. Not in anger, not in grace, but silently, clearly, unfailingly. What you nurture within will seek to take shape in the outer world. Because imagination is never just inside. It wants to live, to breathe, to become. But what happens when this inner vision is no longer just a feeling, but a force that shapes reality itself? This is what Neville Goddard believed. And his answer is as quiet as it is radical. Neville Goddard, a teacher of the inner world, did not speak of outer systems, but of the unseen, consciousness, imagination, and the inner states from which reality begins. His teachings belong to the metaphysical tradition of the 20th century, deeply rooted in the New Thought movement, yet distinct, clear, radical in their own way. He believed, the world around you is nothing but a mirror of your inner state. He spoke of states, invisible spaces within, where life is already taking shape long before it becomes visible. To him, imagination was not merely a tool, but the gateway to everything that could ever become real. He believed in a spiritual principle he called the law of assumption. This law says, what you assume within becomes reality in the outer world. Not because you wish it, but because you feel it as if it already is. Do not imagine what you want, he said, but what you would experience if it were already real. When you enter into a state within, when you quietly accept it, without striving, without doubting, life begins to move, not as a reward, but as a mirror. What you are, not what you want, takes form. But this is not about control, not about a method, not about manipulating life. Goddard often spoke of the divine principle within us, the power of I am. But that doesn't mean man is God. That would be presumptuous and wrong. Rather, man stands in relation to something higher, and that relationship moves through him, through images, through states, through choices. You do not create the world, but you influence how it meets you. Goddard wrote, "Imagination is not daydreaming, It is a state of the soul, and that is the turning point. When you begin to choose, consciously, what you carry within. Because every feeling is a quiet decision, and every decision shapes what follows. Perhaps it all begins here, when you pause and ask yourself, what state am I living in, and where is it leading me? You cannot see it. You cannot measure it. And yet, it is there, between your inner world and what happens to you. There is a space, a field, not made of matter, not of words, but of states, of thoughts that return, of images you cannot release, of feelings you quietly hold as true. This field is like soil. Whatever you place within it will begin to grow. Not overnight, not exactly as you expect, but it will take shape. Perhaps not where you're looking, but where you're standing within. Because imagination is motion, not visible, but felt, an inner current, like the tide beneath the surface. If you constantly dwell on loss, if you silently expect life to pass you by, your vision will shift. You will notice exactly what confirms that state. Not because you attract it like a magnet, but because you recognize it, because it already lives in you. The invisible acts like a filter, a silent frame around what you see. Not the event itself decides, but your state within it. And that state doesn't begin in the moment itself. It begins much earlier, with a quiet thought, almost unnoticed. This is just how the world works. Maybe I'm just not enough. It probably won't work anyway. Not shouted, not declared, just softly accepted, again and again. And if you think it, feel it, assume it long enough, it becomes reality. But if that is true, if the outer world bends to the inner, then each day is a new field, a place where you can plant something else, not by force, not by pressure, but by clarity. Because what you carry within will always return to you. Not only what you love becomes active in your life, also what you fear, what you keep thinking, what you inwardly reject, yet silently keep alive. For even fear is an assumption. Even doubt is an image. And the more you nourish them within, the deeper they take root in your experience. Many say, I wish for happiness, for love, for abundance. But their inner voice whispers, I don't deserve any of this. They long for closeness, yet expect rejection. They hope for change, but carry the quiet image of inevitable failure. And this is the tragedy. It is not reality that shapes us, but our image of it. Neville Goddard wrote, "What you assume, whether good or bad, you will experience. So if you keep assuming you are not enough, that life overlooks you, that others are more worthy, this is not neutral thinking. It is a quiet vow, an image you repeat like a silent prayer, and the world responds. But this does not mean you are to blame. It means You are involved. Responsibility begins where you acknowledge your role in the pattern, not as guilt, but as invitation. For if your inner attitude becomes part of your reality, then you can begin to shift it. Not through force, but through awareness, through the quiet question, what do I carry within, and why? Perhaps you've often asked yourself why nothing seems to change, despite your wishes, your efforts, your prayers, your hope. And perhaps the reason is not that you want too little, but that you imagine the wrong thing. For imagination does not begin in the mind. It begins in a state, in the way you see yourself, in the way you feel life before it even happens. The turning point does not begin with a goal, but with a choice. What state do I choose to carry within, even if the world does not yet reflect it? Goddard did not speak of techniques. He spoke of inner truth, not of manifestation, but of assumption, of a deep and quiet yes to what is whole, good, and healing. Not loud, not exaggerated, but still, like an inner image you hold with care, as one protects a flame from the wind. Do not imagine what you want, but what you would feel if it were already true. Not as escape, but as a conscious stance, as inner alignment. What does peace feel like? Not outside you, but within. What does love feel like? When you no longer have to fight for it. What does freedom feel like? Not as a dream, but as a quiet now. Perhaps nothing will change at once. Perhaps the world will still look the same. But what you carry within will one day find its way outward. You don't need to force a vision. You don't need to summon a state. But you must be honest with what you hold inside. Because whether you like it or not, your inner posture shapes your perception, your tone, your decisions, and, in time, your life. What you feel again and again shapes what you notice. What you notice shapes how you respond, and how you respond shapes your world. It's not magic. It's not fate. It's a quiet circle that closes again and again. A thought, a feeling, a small motion within, and then a reaction from the world. Picture two people walking down the same street. One sees only coldness, distrust, and distance. The other sees a place where closeness might arise. Not because the world is different, but because their inner image is. You don't need to change the world, but you can change how you meet it. And sometimes, that is the moment when doors appear that you hadn't even seen before. Not because they were locked, but because your eyes were not yet open. Goddard once implied, there are places in your life you will never walk into because you never imagined yourself there. Not because you are unworthy, but because you never saw yourself within them. Perhaps that's the point. Not to control everything, but to carry, with quiet clarity, what you truly long for. Still, truthfully, clearly. Everything begins with a thought, not the one you speak aloud, but the one you silently feel, again and again. The image, the inner assumption, the unspoken state you hold as true. That is the first impulse from which reality unfolds. Neville Goddard taught, "The world is consciousness expressed. What you accept within will show itself without, sooner or later, in a form you will recognize." This is not a metaphor, not a poetic symbol. It is a law of life. Everything ever created, a painting, a home, a love, a failure, began as an inner state, as an image that solidified, took form, and became reality. You cannot avoid shaping, because you are always imagining, even when you're unaware of it. The only question is, what? What do you hold within, silently, repeatedly, unconsciously? A state of fear, an image of lack, a quiet, "I'm not enough"? Or are you beginning to nourish a different state, one that is whole, healing, clear? Because this is how imagination works. First comes assumption, then behavior, then reality, and finally, confirmation. What you believe today will be what you feel tomorrow. What you feel shapes your actions, and what you do builds a world around it. It may take time. It may show up differently than expected, but it will come, piece by piece, unseen, then seen. For what you hold within will take shape in your life, in your relationships, in your future. Imagination is the source of all reality. He who masters it begins to live instead of merely reacting.